I stood in the restaurant alone, watching couples celebrate around me while my phone stayed silent in my hand. It was our 5th anniversary. The reservation had been made 3 months ago. I'd confirmed it twice, reminded him last week, this morning. The candles on our table had burned down to stubs. The waiter had refilled my water glass 4 times, each pour more pitiful than the last. I'd ordered nothing. I couldn't eat past the tightness in my throat. 5 years. 5 years of marriage, and he couldn't remember one date. My phone lit up finally. Not a call, just a text. Emergency at work, can't make it. Sorry. Emergency, the same word he'd used last month when he missed my birthday dinner. The same excuse when he forgot to pick me up from the hospital after my surgery. Always an emergency, always something more important than me. I replied with a single word. Okay. The waiter approached with careful sympathy in his eyes. Would you like to order, ma'am, or... Just the check for the water, please. I paid, left a generous tip for his patience, and walked out into the cool October air. My heels clicked against the pavement. The new ones I'd bought just for tonight. The red dress I'd chosen because he once said it made me look beautiful. Once. Years ago, before I became background noise in his life. I drove home slowly, taking the long route past the park where we'd had our first date. The streetlights cast long shadows across empty benches. I remembered how he'd held my hand that night, how he'd looked at me like I was the only person in the world. When had that changed? When had I become invisible? The house was dark when I arrived. Of course it was. He wasn't home. I turned on the lights, kicked off my heels, and stood in our living room, our museum of a life that existed only in photographs on the walls. Wedding pictures, vacation snapshots, smiling versions of people who no longer recognized each other. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the couch, still wearing the red dress. The silence wrapped around me like a familiar blanket. This was my life now. Waiting, understanding, forgiving, always forgiving. My phone buzzed. Not him, a notification from social media. I almost ignored it, but something made me look. It was a tagged photo. My husband standing outside a cafe, smiling wider than I'd seen in years. Next to him stood Vanessa, his ex-girlfriend, the one he dated all through college, the one he claimed meant nothing anymore. They looked comfortable together, laughing, her hand resting casually on his arm. The timestamp said 30 minutes ago, not at work, with her. I stared at the photo until my vision blurred. Not from tears, I was beyond tears. From something darker, something that felt like the final crack in glass that's been breaking slowly for years. I scrolled through more photos. There were dozens. Lunch dates, spanning months, coffee meetings, late dinners, all the times he'd claimed to be working late, buried in projects, too exhausted to notice me. He'd had energy for her. He'd had time for her. He'd had smiles I'd forgotten existed. The wine glass trembled in my hand. I set it down carefully, afraid I might shatter it against the wall, afraid of the rage building inside me. Not hot and explosive, but cold and precise. 5 years of making excuses for him. 5 years of telling myself he was just busy, just stressed, just going through something. 5 years of shrinking myself smaller and smaller to accommodate his absence. I picked up my phone and typed, "Happy anniversary. I saw the photos with Vanessa. I hope she enjoyed the dinner you were supposed to have with me." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Then I walked upstairs to our bedroom. His bedroom, really, since I barely slept there anymore, and pulled out the suitcase from the back of the closet. I began packing methodically, clothes, documents, jewellery my grandmother had given me, the things that were mine before I became his wife. My phone rang. Finally, his name flashing on the screen. I declined the call. It rang again, and again. Text messages started flooding in. I can explain. It's not what it looks like. She needed help with something. The usual script of someone caught in a lie. I turned off my phone and continued packing. The front door slammed open around midnight. His footsteps pounded up the stairs, frantic and loud. He burst into the bedroom, breathless, his face flushed with panic. "Sienna, please, listen to me." I looked at him calmly, folding a sweater into my suitcase. "There's nothing to explain. I saw enough. She's just a friend. Her mother is sick, and she needed support. On our anniversary?" He fell silent. For once, he had no words. "You forgot again," I said softly, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "You forgot our anniversary, just like you forgot my birthday, just like you forget every promise you make to me. But you remembered to meet her. You remembered to smile for her. You remembered she existed." "Sienna, I'm sorry. I got confused about the date. You got confused for 5 months? Because that's how long these photos go back. 5 months of lunches and dinners and coffee dates while you told me you were too busy to take me to a single movie." His face paled. He hadn't realised I'd looked that far back. "It's not romantic," he said desperately. "She's going through a divorce. She needed a friend. And I needed a husband." The words hung between us, simple and devastating. I zipped the suitcase closed. "Where are you going?" "My sister's house. I'll come back for the rest of my things next week. And for the divorce papers." "Divorce?" He looked genuinely shocked, as if this outcome had never occurred to him. "Sienna, we can fix this. Counselling, whatever you need. What I need is someone who remembers I exist. What I need is a partner who doesn't make me feel like I'm begging for scraps of attention. What I need is the man I married, and he's been gone for years." I pulled the suitcase off the bed and walked past him toward the door. He grabbed my arm, not hard but desperate. "Please, don't do this. I love you." I looked at his hand on my arm, then at his face. "If this is love, I don't want it anymore." I pulled free and walked down the stairs, out the front door, into my car. He stood in the doorway, shouting my name, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I looked back, I might weaken. I might stay. I might give him another chance to forget me again. I drove through empty streets to my sister's apartment across town. She opened the door in her pajamas, took one look at my face, and pulled me inside, without question. I collapsed on her couch, still in the red dress, and finally, I felt it. Not sadness, not even anger, just exhaustion. Bone-deep weariness from carrying a marriage alone for so long. "Do you want to talk about it?" my sister asked gently. "He forgot our anniversary. He was with Vanessa instead. He's been with her for months." She sat beside me and wrapped her arms around my shoulders. "I'm sorry." "I'm not," I whispered, surprised to find it was true. "I'm tired, but I'm not sorry. I should have done this years ago." That night, I slept better than I had in months. No waiting for him to come home. No lying awake wondering if he was thinking of me or someone else. Just silence and peace, and the strange relief of a decision finally made. But I didn't know then what was coming. I didn't know that this was only the beginning. I didn't know I was about to die. The divorce papers were filed on Monday. He contested nothing, signed everything I put in front of him with the desperate hope that compliance might change my mind. It wouldn't. The weeks that followed were mechanical. Dividing assets, separating accounts, informing family. Everyone was shocked. We'd seemed so stable from the outside, so perfect in our photographs. They didn't see the emptiness between the smiling poses. My lawyer was efficient and kind. "You're sure about this?" she asked during our final meeting. "No chance of reconciliation?" "None." "Then we'll have everything finalised in 6 weeks. You're free." Free. The word felt foreign and bright. I was driving home from that meeting when it happened. The light was green. I checked. I'm certain I checked. But the truck ran the red light at full speed. I saw it for only a second before impact, a flash of chrome and inevitability. The sound was catastrophic, metal screaming against metal. My car spun, glass shattered, pain exploded through my body, sharp and everywhere at once. Then silence. I was on the pavement. I didn't remember leaving the car. Above me, the sky was impossibly blue, cloudless and vast. People were shouting, but their voices sounded distant, muffled, as if I were underwater. Someone was pressing on my chest. It hurt. I tried to tell them to stop, but no words came out. Just blood, warm and metallic in my mouth. My vision started dimming at the edges, a tunnel closing slowly. I thought about the divorce papers, still unsigned by the judge. I thought about how I'd almost made it, almost been free, almost started over. Somewhere far away, sirens wailed. Too late, I thought, distantly, always too late. The pain began to fade, replaced by a strange floating sensation, weightless, untethered. The voices around me grew fainter, the blue sky darker. My last thought wasn't of him. It was simpler than that, clearer. I'm so tired. Then nothing. Darkness, peace, silence, until there wasn't. I woke to sunlight streaming through familiar curtains. Too familiar. My bedroom. Not my sister's apartment, not a hospital. My bedroom in the house I'd shared with him, the house I'd left. Panic seized me. Had he brought me back here? Had I dreamed the accident? I sat up too quickly and my body responded without pain, without injury. No broken ribs, no shattered bones, just the slight stiffness of someone who'd slept too long in one position. My hands were wrong. I stared at them in confusion. The skin was younger, smoother. My wedding ring was there, the one I'd removed 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. The date glowed on the screen, October 15th, 3 years earlier. 3 years before the accident, before the divorce papers, before the final anniversary he'd forget. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't possible. This was insane. But the evidence surrounded me. Younger hands, the furniture we'd later sold, photos on the wall from years past, and the memories, crystal clear, every moment of the next 3 years vivid and complete in my mind. The forgotten dinners, the photos with Vanessa, the accident, the moment of my death. I remembered everything. A dream. This had to be a dream. I pinched my arm hard enough to bruise. The pain was sharp and real. Not a dream. Something else. Something impossible. I stood on shaking legs and walked to the mirror. The woman looking back at me was 28, not 31. 3 years younger, wearing a nightgown I'd thrown away long ago. But her eyes, my eyes, held knowledge they shouldn't have. They'd seen the end. They'd lived through 3 years that hadn't happened yet. The bedroom door opened. He walked in, smiling, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. The sight of him, younger, happier before everything fell apart, sent a wave of complicated emotion through me. Not love, not anymore. Just recognition and a strange, cold clarity. "Morning, beautiful. I made your favourite." He kissed my forehead, casual and affectionate, the way he used to before I became convenient rather than cherished. I accepted the coffee automatically, my mind racing. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I had. My own future ghost, standing in the wreckage of my car, drowning in my own blood. "Just a nightmare," I said softly. "Want to talk about it? In 3 years, you'll forget our 5th anniversary to have dinner with your ex-girlfriend. I'll file for divorce, and on my way home from my lawyer's office, a truck will run a red light and kill me. I'll die still married to you, still trapped in the life I was trying to escape." "No," I said instead. "It's already fading." He smiled, reassured, and kissed me again before heading to the shower. The moment he was gone, I set down the coffee and pressed my hands against my face, breathing slowly, trying to process the impossible. I was back. Somehow, impossibly, I was back. And this time, I knew exactly what was coming. This time, I wouldn't wait until the 5th anniversary. I wouldn't spend 3 more years shrinking and forgiving and disappearing. I wouldn't die married to a man who'd forgotten how to see me. This time, I would change everything. The first difference came that afternoon. He'd planned to work late. In my memories, this was one of many nights he'd stay at the office until nearly midnight. I'd learned later through social media that he'd actually been having dinner with Vanessa, the first of dozens of secret meetings. When he called to tell me he'd be late, I didn't say what I'd said before. Okay, I understand. Work is important. Instead, I said, I'd really like you to come home for dinner tonight. It's important to me. Silence on the other end. Surprise. I have a presentation tomorrow. I know, but I'm asking you to prioritize me tonight. Can you do that? More silence. In the original timeline, he'd stayed late anyway. But something in my voice must have been different this time. Firmer, clearer, less willing to accommodate. Okay, he said finally. I'll be home by 7. Thank you. He did come home. And, over dinner, a simple meal I'd prepared without the elaborate effort I used to expend, I watched him carefully, looking for signs of the man who would betray me, the man who would forget me. But all I saw was someone younger, less tired, still capable of eye contact. You're different today, he said, studying my face. How so? More serious, like something's on your mind. Everything is on my mind. Your future betrayal, my future death, the 3 years of slow dissolution I'm trying to prevent. I've just been thinking about us, I said carefully, about what we want from this marriage. What brought this on? Just a feeling like we're at a crossroads and I want to make sure we take the right path. He reached across the table and took my hand. I love you, Sienna. Whatever path we're on it together. Those words, which once would have comforted me, now felt hollow. In my memories, he'd said those same words 100 times while slowly choosing paths that led away from me. I hope so, I said. That night, I made a list in my journal of every betrayal I remembered, every forgotten promise, every moment Vanessa would re-enter his life. I dated each one. If I was somehow living this again, I would need to be prepared. I would need to recognize the warning signs before they became disasters. The second difference came 2 weeks later. In the original timeline, my sister had invited me to her birthday celebration, a weekend trip to the coast with her friends. I declined because he had an important work event that same weekend, and I'd wanted to support him. I'd stayed home alone that weekend while he attended his conference. Later, I'd learned from photos that Vanessa had been at that same conference. That weekend was when they'd reconnected. This time, when my sister invited me, I said yes. What about Julian's work event? She asked, surprised. Julian, my husband's name tasted strange in my mouth now, weighted with future knowledge. He'll be fine without me. I want to spend time with you. The weekend was beautiful. Ocean air and laughter and the feeling of being seen by people who actually cared. My sister and her friends reminded me who I'd been before. Marriage made me smaller, confident, funny, independent. When I returned home Sunday evening, Julian seemed different, agitated. How was the conference? I asked, setting down my bag. Good, productive. How was the coast? Wonderful. I'd forgotten how much I needed time with my sister. He nodded, but something was off in his expression. Disappointment? Frustration? You didn't mention you were going away this weekend. I told you last week. You said it was fine. I don't remember that conversation. I met his eyes steadily. Maybe you weren't listening. The words hung between us, gentle but pointed. In the past, I would have apologized. would have made excuses for his lack of attention. Not anymore. Anyway, I continued lightly, I'm going to make this a regular thing, monthly trips with my sister. It's good for me. I saw something flicker across his face. Surprise, maybe, or calculation. This wasn't the pattern he'd expected. The accommodating wife was establishing boundaries. Whatever makes you happy, he said finally. Over the following months, I continued making small but significant changes. When he forgot our plans, I didn't rearrange my schedule. I kept the plans without him. When he worked late repeatedly, I stopped waiting up, stopped preparing dinners that would go cold. I invested in my own friendships, my own interests, the career I'd let atrophy while trying to be the perfect wife. And I watched him carefully, waiting for the signs I knew were coming. They arrived 6 months after my rebirth. A text message lighting up his phone while he was in the shower. Great seeing you today. Let's do lunch again soon. V. My stomach clenched despite being prepared. Knowing it was coming didn't make it hurt less. But this time, I didn't ignore it. This time, I didn't tell myself it was innocent. When he emerged, I held up his phone. Vanessa texted you. He froze, water still dripping from his hair. Oh, yeah, I ran into her at the conference last week. We caught up over coffee. You didn't mention seeing her. It didn't seem important. It was just coffee. I looked at him for a long moment, remembering the dozens of photos, the secret dinners, the forgotten anniversaries that would come if I let this pattern continue. I'm not comfortable with you spending time alone with your ex-girlfriend, I said calmly. Sienna, we're just friends. I don't care. I'm telling you how I feel. If you respect me, you'll respect this boundary. His face flushed with irritation. That's not fair. You can't tell me who I can be friends with. I'm not telling you. I'm informing you of a boundary. What you do with that information is your choice. But I won't stay in a marriage where my discomfort is less important than your desire to maintain a friendship with someone you used to date. I walked out of the room before he could respond, my heart pounding. This was new territory. In my previous life, I'd never drawn this line, never demanded he choose. I'd been too afraid of seeming controlling, too worried about pushing him away. Now I understood. If setting a reasonable boundary pushed him away, the relationship was already broken. For a week, tension filled the house. He was sullen, withdrawn, clearly resenting my ultimatum. I held firm, neither arguing nor apologizing. Finally, he came to me. I told Vanessa I can't see her anymore, that you're uncomfortable with it. Thank you. I don't think it's fair, but I'll respect your feelings. The words should have made me happy, but they were spoken with resentment, not understanding. He wasn't choosing me. He was complying with the demand he found unreasonable. I realized then that I'd only delayed the inevitable. The man I'd married wasn't a villain, but he wasn't capable of being the partner I needed. The differences between us weren't about Vanessa. They were about fundamental incompatibility, about the different values we held about marriage, attention, priority. In my previous life, I'd waited until I was completely broken before leaving. I'd endured years of neglect before finding the courage to file for divorce. This time, I wouldn't wait. Our 3rd anniversary approached, 2 years earlier than the fatal 5th, when I remembered. I made a reservation at a restaurant, told him about it a week in advance, reminded him 3 days before. On the evening itself, I dressed in the same red dress I'd worn on that last anniversary, the one where I'd sat alone. I arrived at the restaurant on time, and I waited. 7 o'clock passed, then 7:30. My phone stayed silent. At 8, I ordered dinner for one and ate it slowly, methodically, watching couples around me celebrate their own milestones. But unlike last time, I wasn't sad. I was certain. I paid the check and drove home. The house was dark. He wasn't there. At 9:30, he walked through the door. Sorry I'm late. The meeting ran long. He stopped, seeing me still in the red dress. Oh God, was tonight something? Our anniversary. His face went white. Sienna, I'm so sorry. I thought that was next week. You forgot, just like I knew you would. Something in my tone made him pause. What does that mean? I stood, walked to the bedroom and pulled out the divorce papers I'd had prepared the week before. I set them on the coffee table in front of him. I want a divorce. What? Because I forgot one anniversary? Sienna, I know I messed up, but we can fix this. It's not one anniversary, it's a pattern. It's 3 years of being less important than your work, your phone, your convenience. It's watching you choose everything else over choosing me, over and over again. I love you. Maybe you do, but not in a way that makes me feel loved. And I'm done waiting for that to change. He looked at the papers, then at me, genuine confusion on his face. This is really what you want? Yes, because I forgot an anniversary. Because I finally realised that I deserve better than someone who forgets me. The divorce was finalised 6 weeks later. Julian signed everything, still seemingly shocked that I'd actually gone through with it. He tried to change my mind several times, made promises about counselling and change and being better. But I'd already seen his version of better. I'd lived through 3 years of waiting for him to choose me, and I wouldn't do it again. The day the divorce became final, I felt lighter than I had in years. Free. Truly free. I moved into my own apartment, a small 1-bedroom with large windows and plants I'd chosen myself. I redecorated in colours I liked, adopted a cat Julian had never wanted, filled the space with things that made me happy, rather than things that matched someone else's aesthetic. I threw myself into my career, accepting the promotion I'd turned down in my previous timeline because Julian had wanted me to have more time for us. Funny how us had always meant him. My supervisor noticed the change in me immediately. You seem different lately, more focused. I am, I said simply. Within 6 months, I'd led 2 successful campaigns and received another promotion. The work was challenging, fulfilling, everything I'd sacrificed for a marriage that had been dying from the beginning. And then, at a professional conference a year after my divorce, I met someone. His name was Daniel. He was a colleague from another firm, brilliant and kind, with laugh lines around his eyes and a way of listening that made me feel truly heard. We started talking during a networking session and didn't stop for 3 hours. I've never talked this long with someone I just met, he said, smiling. Neither have I. We exchanged numbers. He called the next day, then the day after that. We had coffee, then dinner, then weekend walks through the park where I'd had my first date with Julian years ago. But this was different. Daniel asked about my thoughts, my ambitions, my opinions. He remembered the details I shared, my sister's name, my favourite books, the story I told about my grandmother. He showed up when he said he would. He made plans and kept them. You seem surprised every time I do something I said I would, he observed one evening. I'm not used to people keeping their promises. Well, get used to it. I don't make promises I don't intend to keep. He proved it over and over. He met my sister and charmed her immediately. He took interest in my work, asked thoughtful questions, celebrated my successes. When I told him about my previous marriage, carefully edited, leaving out the impossible parts about rebirth and future knowledge, he just nodded. He didn't appreciate what he had. That's his loss and my incredible fortune. 6 months into our relationship, on a quiet evening in my apartment, he asked me about marriage. I know it's early, he said, and I know your first marriage didn't end well, but I want you to know. I'm not looking for anything casual. When I think about my future, you're in it. Always. No pressure, no timeline. I just want you to know where I stand. I looked at this man who'd kept every promise, who remembered every important date, who chose me consistently and without hesitation. I want that too, I said. Meanwhile, across town, Julian's life was unraveling. I heard about it through mutual friends, then later through social media. 6 months after our divorce, he'd started dating Vanessa. Publicly. Officially. They'd moved quickly, driven by the narrative that they were meant to be, that their reconnection was fate. The relationship lasted 8 months before she left him. I learnt why from my sister, who'd heard from a friend who knew Vanessa's cousin. He'd done the same thing to her that he'd done to me. Forgotten important dates, prioritised work over relationship, made her feel invisible. But Vanessa had less patience than I'd had. She left the moment she felt neglected, unwilling to play second fiddle to his career. After that, I heard he dated a series of women, each relationship shorter than the last. He'd gained weight, his career had stalled. In photos, he looked older, tired, the youthful charm I'd fallen for long gone. My sister showed me one such photo, watching my face carefully for a reaction. Do you feel bad for him? I studied the image, Julian at a bar surrounded by people but looking profoundly alone. I searched inside myself for pity, satisfaction, anything, but all I felt was distance, as if he were a character from a story I'd read long ago. No, I said honestly. I hope he finds happiness. I just hope he learns to treat the next person better. That's generous of you. It's not generosity, it's indifference. He's not my problem anymore. 2 years after my divorce, 1 year before the anniversary, that would have killed me in my previous life. Daniel proposed, not at a restaurant or in public, but during a quiet morning in my apartment, while we drank coffee and watched the sunrise through my windows. Marry me, he said simply, not because it's the next logical step or because we've been together long enough, but because I want to spend every morning like this, with you, for the rest of my life. I said yes. Our wedding was small and perfect, surrounded by people who genuinely loved us both. My sister cried happy tears. Daniel's family welcomed me warmly, and throughout the entire ceremony I felt present, seen, chosen. During our first dance, Daniel whispered in my ear, "Happy?" So happy, I almost can't believe it's real. It's real, I'm real, this is real, and I'm never going to let you forget that. On what would have been my 5th anniversary with Julian, the date I'd sat alone in a restaurant in my previous life, the date that started the chain of events leading to my death, Daniel and I were celebrating our 1st anniversary together. He'd made reservations months in advance. He'd reminded me weekly, not because he needed to, but because he was excited. On the evening itself, he arrived home early with flowers and a gift he'd clearly spent time choosing. 1 year down, he said, pulling me close. Infinity to go. At the restaurant, over wine and candlelight, I thought about the sliding doors of fate, how one timeline had led to death, and this one had led to life, how my greatest tragedy had become my greatest blessing, because it forced me to value myself enough to demand better. "You're quiet tonight," Daniel observed. "Everything okay?" "Everything's perfect. I was just thinking about how different my life is from what I thought it would be." Better or worse? Infinitely better. He smiled and raised his glass. To the life we chose. To the life we chose. And now? I echoed. Sometimes, late at night when I couldn't sleep, I wondered about the accident. In my original timeline, it would have happened 6 months ago. The truck would have run the red light. I would have died on that pavement, still trapped in divorce proceedings, still bound to a man who'd never truly seen me. But I'd changed everything. I'd left early, built a different life, chose a different path. Was there still a truck? Did it still run that light? Did someone else die because I'd altered fate? I didn't know. I couldn't know. What I did know was this. I had been given an impossible gift. The chance to do it over, to choose myself, to refuse to settle for crumbs when I deserved the whole feast. Some people spend their entire lives waiting for someone else to value them. I'd died waiting. Then I'd been reborn with the clarity to value myself. 3 years after my divorce from Julian, 5 years after my mysterious rebirth, I sat in my beautiful home with my husband, who chose me every single day, working a job I loved, surrounded by people who celebrated rather than diminished me. And somewhere across town, Julian lived with the consequences of his choices, the friendships he'd neglected, the love he'd taken for granted, the woman who'd been willing to die for a marriage he couldn't be bothered to remember. I heard through the grapevine that he'd finally entered therapy, that he was working on himself, trying to understand the patterns that had cost him everything. I hoped it was true. Not for me, I'd long since moved on, but for whoever he might love next. Everyone deserved the chance to grow. But I also knew this. Some people learn lessons early, and some people learn them after they've already lost what mattered most. Julian was the second kind, and while I hoped he'd become better, I would never regret leaving when I did, because staying would have killed me, literally in one timeline, spiritually in another. And I'd chosen life. On a Saturday morning, 6 years after everything changed, I woke to Daniel kissing my forehead and sunlight streaming through our windows. "Morning, beautiful," he said softly. I smiled up at him, this man who never forgot, who always showed up, who treated our love like the precious thing it was. "Morning. I made your coffee, and I thought we could go to the farmer's market today, then have lunch at that new place you mentioned last week." He'd remembered. Of course he'd remembered. "That sounds perfect." As we drove to the market later, his hand resting on my knee, I thought about the woman I'd been in my first life. Small, accommodating, perpetually waiting for someone else to decide she was worth remembering. And I thought about the woman I'd become. Strong, certain, unwilling to accept less than I deserved. The rebirth hadn't just given me time, it had given me knowledge. The knowledge that I was worth choosing, that settling for scraps was a choice, not a destiny, that I could demand better and build better and be better. In my previous life, I'd died still hoping Julian would change. In this life, I'd changed myself. And that had made all the difference. I looked out the window at the autumn leaves falling, at the world continuing its beautiful, ordinary turning. Somewhere, Julian was living his life, learning his lessons too late to save what we'd had. But that life was no longer connected to mine. We'd diverged completely, two people who'd briefly walked the same path before, realizing we were heading to different destinations. I felt no anger toward him anymore, no bitterness, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing I'd escaped, rebuilt, and thrived. "What are you thinking about?" Daniel asked, glancing at me with affection. "Just how lucky I am." "We're both lucky," he corrected gently. "I found you, you found me. We found each other." Yes, I thought. After I found myself first. The market was crowded and beautiful, full of flowers and fresh bread, and people celebrating the simple joy of a Saturday morning. Daniel held my hand as we walked, pointing out interesting stalls, making me laugh with whispered observations. This was my life now. Not perfect. No life was perfect, but chosen. Built on mutual respect and consistent effort and the revolutionary act of treating each other like we mattered. I bought sunflowers because they made me happy. Daniel bought the ingredients for dinner because he enjoyed cooking for me. We walked home through the park, taking the long way because we weren't in a hurry, because time together was something we savoured rather than survived. "Happy?" he asked, the same question he always asked. "So happy," I answered, the same answer I always gave. And it was true. Completely, impossibly true. I'd been given the rarest of gifts, a second chance, a clean slate, another beginning, And I'd used it to build something real, something lasting, something that honored the woman I died being and the woman I'd been reborn to become. In my first life, Julian had forgotten me until I disappeared completely. In this life, I'd remembered myself, and I would never forget again.